Hello and welcome to News Central TV. My name is Mazino Appeal. Now here are the stories making headlines beyond the continent. As President Trump's global tariffs on metals took effect, the European Union and Canada have announced billions of dollars in levies on American goods. Canada on Wednesday announced additional tariffs on $20.7 billion of U.S. goods, retaliating against sweeping American levies on steel and aluminium. Canadian Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc called U.S. President Donald Trump 25% steel and aluminium tariffs implemented completely unjustified, unfair, and unreasonable. In the same vein, the European Commission announced plans to implement countermeasures starting April 1st in response to U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stressed the EU's willingness to engage in dialogue with the U.S. despite the looming countermeasures.
Today, I am announcing that the Government of Canada, following a dollar-for-dollar approach, will be imposing, as of 12:01 a.m. tomorrow, March 13th, 2025, 25% reciprocal tariffs on an additional $29.8 billion of imports from the United States.
As of this morning, the United States is applying a 25% tariff on imports of steel and aluminum. We deeply regret this measure. Tariffs are taxes. They are bad for business and worse for consumers. They are disrupting supply chains. They bring uncertainty for the economy. Jobs are at stake, prices up. Nobody needs that on both sides, neither in the European Union nor in the United States. Our countermeasures will be introduced in two steps, starting with April 1st and fully in place as of April 13th. In the meantime, we will always remain open to negotiations. We firmly believe that in a world fraught with geo-economic and political uncertainties, it is not in our common interest to burden our economies with such tariffs.
Meanwhile, President Donald Trump says his tariff plans will restore fairness to U.S. trade, as major partners announced countermeasures to new U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminium. Trump said this during a meeting with Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin. Trump vowed to respond to the European Union's retaliatory tariffs on select American goods as he defended his decision to impose 25% tariffs on imported steel and aluminium from all trading partners. The U.S. president said that he will be willing to grant very little flexibility to trading partners once his tariffs are implemented. Trump also spoke on the Ukraine-Russia ceasefire talks.
I think that the tariffs, there are some cases where they're a little beyond reciprocal because, we've been abused for a long time as a country. We have been abused really for a long time, and we will be abused no longer. But we had a great success yesterday. We have a full ceasefire if it kicks in. We have to see. It's up to Russia now. But we've had a good relationship with both parties, actually, and we'll see. We'll be knowing people are going to Russia right now as we speak, and hopefully we can get a ceasefire from Russia. And if we do, I think that would be 80% of the way to getting this horrible bloodbath.
In the meantime, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he is disappointed with US President Donald Trump's latest tariffs on steel and aluminium, adding that his government will take a pragmatic approach and keep all options on the table.
Felt by the House, but Canada. On the question of tariffs, obviously, like everybody else, I'm disappointed to see global tariffs in relation.
In contrast with the European Union, which said it would impose countermeasures from April 1st in response to U.S. tariffs of 25% on steel and aluminium imports from the biggest economies' trading partners. Prime Minister Keir Starmer last month met with U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington to discuss the matter. Trump signaled the potential for a great post-Brexit trade accord and that Britain has been seeking since its departure from EU at the start of the decade.
On the question of tariffs, obviously, like everybody else, I'm disappointed to see global tariffs in relation to steel and aluminium. But we will take a pragmatic approach. We are, as he knows, negotiating an economic deal which covers and will include tariffs if we succeed, but we will keep all options on the table. Can I also pay tribute to the bravery and dedication of all those responding to the ship collision off the East Yorkshire coast? Our thoughts, and I'm sure of the whole House, are with the family of the crew member who is sadly presumed dead. I welcome the progress in talks between Ukraine and the United States. We must now redouble our efforts to get a lasting, secure peace. Mr. Speaker, on Saturday, I'll convene international leaders to discuss how we can make further progress.
Similarly, Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has criticized the United States' decision to impose blanket tariffs on steel and aluminium, calling the move entirely unjustified. Despite hopes for an exemption following talks with President Trump, the White House confirmed that no special treatment would be granted to Australia. Albanese expressed disappointment over the decision, noting it strained the long-standing relationship between the two nations. However, he emphasized that Australia would refrain from retaliatory measures, believing such actions would harm both economies. While Australia is not a major player in steel exports, it remains a crucial supplier of iron ore to the United States market, with companies like BlueScope employing thousands in the States.
Such a decision by the Trump administration is entirely unjustified. This is against the spirit of our two nations' enduring friendship and fundamentally at odds with the benefits that our economic partnership has delivered over more than 70 years. Our government will continue to put forward a very...
Now to discuss more on the Trump tariff war, we're joined by foreign policy analyst Mahfouz Alabidou. Mahfouz, you're welcome. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Now, I'm hoping you're there. Oh, good, great, grand, welcome. Now, so let's talk about this, the tariff wars. What strategies could African governments adopt to mitigate any adverse effect of the US-EU trade tensions, especially in sectors like pharmaceuticals or energy, where they have significant investments?
Yeah, so some of that the government can adopt, strategies to this is one, consider diversification, you expand trade here, Latin America, and Africa itself. We have another dimension of expanding. The topic I'd like to talk about is value chain, which is focus on high pharmaceuticals and is to reduce resilience of materials, which of course.
Apologies there, a bit of a technical issue. We'll be bringing him perhaps in subsequent bulletins. Now, away from the Trump tariff wars, the Kremlin announced on Wednesday that it is waiting for the U.S. to provide more details about a proposed 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine, which Ukraine agreed to after recent talks in Saudi Arabia. Following the Jeddah talks, the U.S. lifted its freeze on military aid to Ukraine and stated that the ball is now in Moscow's court. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov emphasized that Moscow was planning discussions with the U.S. in the coming days to gather more information on the ceasefire proposal. Peskov also hinted at the possibility of a high-level phone call between Russian and U.S. officials. Despite previous Russian resistance to a ceasefire, Moscow is closely monitoring the developments in Jeddah.
Hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians. And we hope that they'll say yes to peace. The ball is now in their court. And but again, the president's objective here is, number one, above everything else, he wants the war to end. And I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
Meanwhile, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has emphasized that any ceasefire in Ukraine should be a component of a broader peace process aimed at securing a long-term agreement. Now, this statement followed Ukraine's support for the U.S. proposed 30-day truce with Russia. Scholz underlined that a ceasefire on its own would not suffice unless it is part of a larger framework designed to achieve a sustainable resolution. The remarks were made during a press conference in Berlin, where Scholz was joined by EU Council President Antonio Costa. The German leader's comments reflects the ongoing discussions surrounding the conflict in Ukraine and the international community's efforts to negotiate peace.
Eine Waffenruhe muss in einen Friedensprozess eingebettet sein, der in eine dauerhafte Vereinbarung mündet. Die Souveränität der Ukraine muss gewahrt bleiben. Die Ukraine braucht starke Streitkräfte als wichtigste Sicherheitsgarantie für das Land. All das wird es in den Gesprächen gehen müssen, die nun hoffentlich sehr bald an Fahrt aufnehmen.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski has confirmed that U.S. military aid to Ukraine, which passes through Poland, resumes to previous levels following recent talks between the U.S. and Ukraine in Saudi Arabia. The resumption of aid follows a temporary freeze last week after a public disagreement between U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. However, after Ukraine endorsed a proposal for a 30-day ceasefire with Russia and agreed to engage in immediate negotiations, Trump lifted the freeze. Poland, a strong supporter of Ukraine, facilitates much of the military assistance, with up to 95% passing through the Jasnyoka logistics hub near its eastern border.
Dostawy uzbrojenia przez Jasionkę wróciły do poprzednich poziomów. Rozumiem, że Starlinki też działają.
Now we go on a short break. When we return, over 300 hostages freed after escaping gunmen in Pakistan train hijack. This and more after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. In the Middle East, Israeli forces have reported fresh arrests as they kept up raids in the northern occupied West Bank, a day after troops shot dead 3 Palestinians as part of an ongoing military operation. Overnight, Israeli troops conducted raids in the villages of Kabatia and Araba, arresting about a dozen Palestinians allegedly involved in terrorist activities and seizing around 100 kilograms of material used to make explosives. The detainees were handed over to the Israeli police and the Shin Bet security agency for further investigation. Several of those arrested were escorted by Israeli soldiers to military vehicles before being taken to a building in Araba that was used by troops as an interrogation center. Now, Pakistan's army says it has freed more than 300 hostages from a passenger train seized by militants in Balochistan province. I'll take that again. That's the Balochistan province. The military spokesperson said more than 33 militants were killed during the operation. More than 450 passengers were on board when a military separatist group captured the train in a remote frontier district of Balochistan province on Tuesday afternoon, with an unknown number of hostages still being held. The assault was immediately claimed by the Baloch Liberation Army, which released a video of an explosion on the track, followed by dozens of militants emerging from hiding places in the mountains and storming onto the carriages. Narrating his ordeal, one of the passengers taken hostage in the Pakistan train siege says they escaped as the militants intensively fired at them from behind.
रात उन्होंने बंदी बना के रखा हुआ था। सुबह 5 बजे जैसे वो कुछ अंदर आराम करने लग गए थे, 1-2 चक्कर लगाता था, क्योंकि उन्होंने रात को बंदे बहुत शूट किए थे, कुछ पंजाबी कुछ सराइकी, तो उन्होंने बोला अभी ये भागेंगे नहीं। उन्होंने पहले भी ये बोला था कि अगर तुम भागोगे तो हम शूट कर देंगे। तो सुबह 5 बजे हम उधर से भागे हैं और पीछे से उन्होंने गोलियां भी बहुत चलाई हैं ना, एक-एक करके सब बाहर आ जाओ। फिर बाकी भी दरवाजे खोल दिए हमने डिब्बों के, तो सारे बाहर निकल गए। उन्होंने खवातीन को तो अलग कर दिया, भेज दिया उनको कोयटा वाली साइड पे ना, पीछे से जहाँ से आ रहे थे उन्होंने वहाँ भेज दिया वापस। और बाकी जो लड़के वगैरह थे और बुजुर्ग लोग थे ना, उनको भी भेजा उन्होंने, जो बुजुर्ग थे।
नीचे उतर आओ, आपको कोई नुकसान नहीं पहुंचाएंगे। जब नीचे उतर आए 182 बंदे, फिर उन्होंने अपनी मर्जी से बंदों को न मारा। कम से कम 110 बंदे उन्होंने मकसद के मौके पे टाइम से मारते रहे, और उसके बाद जो है वो जो अंदर थे उनको भी मारा।
रहे थे, दाड़े मार रहे थे, बस कुछ लेट गए, हम भी लेट गए, पूरी ट्रेन में सब लोग लेट गए कि अपनी जान बचाए। बस बाहर से कुछ फायरिंग हुई, ब्लास्ट हुए, बस उसके बाद फिर जो ना हमें कहा जी आप लोग नीचे उतरे। वो लोग नहीं उतर रहे थे, मैं अपने बच्चों को लेके उतर गया। मैंने कहा जब वो कह रहे उतरो तो फिर तो उतरो ना, अंदर आके मारना शुरू करेंगे फिर क्या करेंगे। हम लोग उतरे, खैर उसने मेरे बच्चों को भी छोड़ दिया, मुझे भी छोड़ दिया, मेरी घरवाली को भी छोड़ दिया। उसने कहा पीछे मुड़ के नहीं देखना, जाओ।
Now, China will host a trilateral meeting on Friday with Russia and Iran to discuss Tehran's nuclear program, and according to China's foreign ministry, that is. The talks will focus on the Iranian nuclear issue, along with other matters of mutual interest between the three countries. The meeting will feature China's Vice Foreign Minister Ma Jiangzu, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, and Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi. This comes after the U.S. withdrew from the 2015 nuclear agreement under President Donald Trump, a deal that had placed restrictions on Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief.
行伊朗核问题中俄伊北京会晤，外交部副部长马朝旭将主持会议，俄罗斯副外长里亚布科夫、伊朗副外长加里布阿巴迪来京出席。 三方将就伊朗核问题及其他共同关心的问题交换意见。
In South America, a little over a week after giving birth to her first child, the president of the Chilean Chamber of Deputies, Carol Cariola, returned to Congress to lead the session where lawmakers voted on a censure motion seeking her removal. With her 8-day-old baby in her arms, Communist Carol Cariola overcame a vote of no confidence seeking to remove her as president of the Chilean Chamber of Deputies. The congresswoman, who is being investigated for possible influence peddling, held her baby while sitting at the chamber table while calling for a vote on the proposal for her impeachment, which ultimately passed with 72 votes against, 52 in favor, and 1 abstention. Once the procedure was complete, Cariola celebrated by raising her left fist, an image that quickly went viral, along with some criticism on social media for having exposed her son. Supporters of former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte gathered for a rally in the southern island of Mindanao following his arrest on an international criminal court warrant tied to his deadly crackdown on drugs. Lawyers for former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, believed headed for the Hague to face International Criminal Court over his deadly crackdown on drugs, filed a petition Wednesday demanding his return to Manila. Duterte faces a charge of the crime against humanity of murder for a crackdown that rights groups estimate killed tens of thousands of mostly poor men, often without proof they were linked to drugs.
Yung ginawa nilang paghuli sa Pangulo. Papakita po namin yung buong suporta namin po para may balik sa Pilipinas si Pangulong Duterte po.
At saka nagbigay ng pag-asa. Ngayon, nawala na rin. Pagdasal ko siya na nasa mabuti siyang kalagayan. Kita siya sa kapahamakan.
Lalo tayong naligaw. Dahil sa ganitong na pinagbigyan natin siya ng pagkakataon, paano nakikita natin na yung ama niya na may mga mabuting nagawa para maituwid niya yung mga bagay na dapat na yung legacy ng tatay niya, itayo niya na sa mabuting pamamaraan. Ngunit ito ang nangyari sa atin.
Back in Europe, rubbish bins are being left uncollected on the streets of Birmingham after hundreds of refuse collectors walked out indefinitely. Nearly 400. And that's it tonight on Beyond the Continent. To remember, you can send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number on your screens now. And do follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can also watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, GoTV channel 23, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and of course on YouTube.